He walked through flames that would have burned lesser men, and when he stepped out, the burn had not taken him. It had refined him into gold. There is a threshold that many of us approach and then turn away from, the threshold of necessary suffering. We like to imagine that growth can be polite, incremental, and well-lit. Frequently it is, but circumstances sometimes press us into a deeper kind of education. The decision to step into trial is both a crisis and a vocation. It is crisis because life's architecture sometimes collapses beneath our feet. It is vocation because some transformations require deliberate entrance into heat. The person who chooses this path does not seek pain for its own sake. Rather, they recognize that the self they have been tending will not hold in the presence of greater aims. The present identity must be sacrificed, so a larger one can be made. Why would anyone choose this? The reasons are as varied as human lives. Sometimes the outward pressure is inescapable loss, humiliation, or betrayal forces a confrontation. More often, it is an inward summons, a disquiet, an unquiet hunger that polite success cannot satisfy. You may be comfortable in a way that feels like slow suffocation. There is the feeling that you are repeating scripts, living borrowed meanings, and that the map used to navigate will never get you where your deeper aim has gone. The flame becomes an invitation: either continue in a comfortable smallness or risk burning in order to become more capacious. Choosing trial is not a romanticization of hardship. It is a strategic reorientation. The person who elects the furnace does so with the acceptance of cost. Relationships may fray. Reputation may be at risk. There is social misunderstanding. That makes the choice costly and therefore clarifying. Only choices that require sacrifice cut away hedges and forced diversions. They focus attention. There is also a moral logic here. Integrity demands test. If you claim to care about truth, compassion, or excellence, those claims must be tested. The furnace is the proving ground. When you prioritize integrity over comfort, you accept temporary dislocation for long-term alignment. This is the difference between someone who speaks grandly in theories and the person whose words carry the weight of tested living. Practically, stepping into trial requires preparation. It is not about rushed heroics. You do not throw yourself into chaos without boundary. Preparation translates into rituals, daily practices that buffer the nervous system, relational agreements that provide reliable anchors, and a plan for modest risk increments. Some trials are unavoidable, others are chosen and therefore manageable. Preparation means you enter not as a flailing animal, but as a person with a toolkit. Finally, we must resist the cultural script that makes resilience into spectacle. Choosing trial is quiet, sober, and often private. It is an inward apprenticeship more than a public performance. There is dignity in that privacy. The person who accepts the first flame often discovers that most of their learning is made far from camera, in the repetitive acts that stitch courage into habit. The threshold is not a single dramatic leap. It is a series of small entrances repeated day after day. Step willingly when the call becomes clearer than comfort. The first flame is the beginning of refinement, not its end. Fire is a teacher with blunt instruments. It strips superficials and forces an encounter with material reality. If you want to know the composition of your character, the furnace will make it visible. It does so by exposing the hidden alloys you have gained over years, the habits of avoidance, the brittle consolations, the self-deceptions dressed as dignity. The anatomy of burning is not merely physical metaphor, it is practical analysis. In the heat, you discover which elements of yourself are malleable and which are rigid. You discover what you can temper and what will shatter if mishandled. First, fire reveals illusions. These are the comfortable stories we tell about our indispensability, about the kindness that is actually compliance, about the competence that hides fear. When external conditions falter, these narratives fail to provide shelter. The harshness of trial unmasks them. This unmasking is painful precisely because it overturns long, standing commitments that have functioned as identity props. But revelation is also liberating. Once you see the illusion as a prop, you can choose whether to keep it or dismantle it. Second, fire purges attachments. Attachment to an identity, to a role, or to a predictable outcome creates fragility. The heat separates the core from the accretion. Where you once clutched a status like a life preserver, burning shows whether it is buoyant or rotten. Purging does not mean indiscriminate renunciation, it means clear-eyed pruning. In that pruning remains the possibility for regrowth in healthier form. Third, the furnace clarifies values. Under low heat, values can be ornamental. Nice things one says at dinner parties. Under flame, priorities reveal themselves by the choices one actually makes in crisis. Does compassion survive when cost is real? Does honesty prevail when expediency would be easier? Trials force decisions that show what one values beyond ideology, in line with lived action. Fourth, fire forces relational truth-telling. When your world narrows, the quality of relationships is exposed. Some connections will prove shallow, others will stand and provide real support. The anatomy of burning unmasks who is willing to show up in the small ways that matter. Bringing soup, sitting through silence, or holding a steady gaze. That revelation is painful, because it may require mourning the loss of acquaintances who were not friends, but it is also clarifying in that it clears ground for deeper connections. Fifth, suffering reorients time perception. In comfort, we plan in roughly linear ways. In fire, time contracts immediacies require attention. This contraction frees a certain honesty about priorities. Bonsai wisdom. The crisis reveals what must be tended now and what can wait. That triage is a ruthless form of clarity. Finally, burning is a distillation. In chemistry, impurities are removed through heat. What remains is purer, sometimes denser, and often more valuable. Human refinement follows a similar arc. The process is not about violence for its own sake. It is about selective removal so that the core, resilient capacity, clarity of purpose, and authentic courage becomes more manifest. Accept the clarifying cruelty of the furnace. It reveals what to cherish, what to let go, and what to temper for the life you are to inhabit. When the heat is upon you, endurance is the capacity to remain with reality rather than flee into either denial or frantic distraction. Holding the heat is less dramatic than some imagine. It is a steady practice, a series of micro-decisions to remain present, regulated, and observant. The inner architecture that supports endurance combines physiological regulation, disciplined attention, and an inner witness that can narrate experience without being swallowed by it. Physiology matters. Under stress, the nervous system is primed for survival responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Long-term negotiation with heat requires practices that restore the breathing patterns, vagal tone, and bodily habits which permit sustained engagement. Simple acts, paced breathing, grounding movements, restorative sleep, are not optional softeners, they are the infrastructure of endurance. A person who is sleep-deprived and dysregulated will be brittle in heat. One who maintains embodied practices sustains capacity. Attention is the second pillar. Training attention is the work of channeling orientation from the multiplied distracted to the focused present. This entails short practices that increase the length and quality of undistracted focused time. Blocked labor, meditation, or sensory grounding. When your attention is disciplined, heat is less likely to produce catastrophic thinking. You can see the next practical step, not merely spiral into catastrophic hypotheticals. The inner witness is the capacity to observe experience without being subsumed. It is that notices fear but does not become it, that records sorrow and still moves. Cultivate a voice inside you that says, "This is happening, I can respond." This witness grows by practice, journaling, reflective pause, and the habit of labeling emotions. Naming diminishes overwhelm. I'm anxious. is a different datum than undifferentiated terror. It invites tactical responses. Endurance is also ethical. It requires saying, "I will do the hard thing now because it matters later." This ethical posture rejects immediate relief as a primary value. It asks, what is the greater aim that justifies present discomfort? The answer must be concrete and compelling. Vague ideals do not hold under pressure. Particular commitments do. For example, I will attend this apprenticeship because I want to be able to support my family without fear. This specificity feeds persistence. Another aspect is micro-repair. Holding heat does not mean martyrdom. It means small recoveries that prevent collapse. After intense labor, schedule restorative activities: a short walk, a bowl of nourishing food, a friendly call. These small repairs restore the nervous system and allow the next round of endurance. Endurance without repair becomes rigid and, eventually, brittle. Finally, endurance requires community witnesses. The inner witness is powerful, but isolation makes it less reliable. Trusted companions who can mirror your progress, who will remind you of your values when memory dims, provide scaffolding. They are not rescuers. Rescue undermines autonomy, but they are witnesses who keep the narrative honest. Hold the heat with regulated breath, disciplined attention, and a witness that remembers your purpose. Endurance is the alchemy that prevents flame from becoming annihilation. Suffering untended becomes bitterness. Suffering worked becomes skill. The alchemical mindset approaches hardship with craftsmanship. You ask, what can this teach me? And then you build practices that extract that lesson and convert it into capacity. This is not a pious platitude. It is a rigorous methodology for channeling energy that would otherwise degrade into victimhood. Begin by making a ledger. Document what the fire revealed about limitations and what has been lost. Loss is not merely about pain, it is data. If a betrayal revealed a tendency to defer, then one skill to cultivate is assertive speech. If physical depletion revealed neglect, a skill to grow is somatic discipline. The ledger translates raw sensation into targeted craft. Second, design practices with incremental loading. Athletes improve by progressive overload, small, repeated increases that demand adaptation. Emotional and psychological capacities respond similarly. If you wish to be less reactive, begin with short exposure exercises to provocation and lengthen them gradually while measuring outcomes. If you want steadiness under leadership, practice speaking calmly to one person, then to larger groups. The craft uses micro-progressions. Third, ritualize learning. Ritual gives practice form. Routines that begin with a moment of naming a specific skill to cultivate, even for 5 minutes. Strengthen the practice because they prime intention. Rituals also provide indicators for when you have deviated. The craftsman's routine signals fidelity and surfaces slippage early. Fourth, gather feedback. A craft is social. Skill requires external calibration. Locate mentors, peers, or teachers who can give precise, non-moralizing feedback. If you are learning to manage anger, a coach can suggest small behavioral modifications. If you are rebuilding integrity, a witness can hold you accountable. Feedback shortens the learning curve. Fifth, translate pain into practice rather than into shame. Shame hollowed a person. Shame tends to hide and fossilize. Practice converts shame into work by giving it a structure and a route to repair. Instead of asking, what did I do wrong? Ask, what single corrective action will help next time? Repair is concrete. Apologize. Reenact a promise. Schedule a corrective behavior. Sixth, scale competence into contribution. Skill trained in solitude should eventually be tested in service. The craftsman does not hoard competence, he deploys it. Use your newly forged capacities to serve. Teach a small class, lead a project, offer help. Use tests that are real but contained. This transforms private mastery into public utility. Seventh, cultivate aesthetic standards. All craft depends on taste. What counts as good? Clear standards prevent drift. Define criteria for excellence in your field and practice toward those benchmarks. A taste guides subtle refinements that mere repetition will not discover. Finally, accept the iterative nature of alchemy. Transmutation is not completed in a single crisis. The furnace returns, sometimes, with subsequent life stages. The craftsman delights in ongoing refinement rather than in a final, secure product. This adoption of continuous apprenticeship prevents arrogance and keeps skill alive. Treat your suffering as raw ore. Refine it through precise practice, feedback, and service until it becomes the usable metal of competence and contribution. Stepping out of fire into the wider world is an act of translation. You must take what is now true inside you and let it reshape ordinary living. Emergence is not an exalted coronation. It is the mundane art of integration. The gold you are is less about luminosity than about density. Choices carry more consequence. Speech has more economy, and presence affects systems rather than merely people. Integration begins with modest public experiments. Don't assume that private mastery will land seamlessly in every context. Test your new faculties in low-stakes settings. Have one honest conversation at work. Lead a brief meeting that uses your new calm. Practice holding a boundary during a family gathering. These micro-entries give feedback on how your interchange interacts with existing patterns around you. A crucial element of integration is humility. You will discover that some old environments resist your newness. People may not welcome your steadiness because it highlights their volatility. Resist the temptation to feel superior. Instead, translate the inner work into patience and curiosity. Offer clarity without condemnation. Teach by example, not by moralizing. Another practical move is to redesign systems. If you now value depth, restructure your calendar to reflect it. Create time blocks, reduce meetings that fragment attention, and build rituals that protect focus. Integration is a structural as well as psychic adjustment. Your life must be arranged so that the new capacities can be exercised. Language must change too. The gold speaks differently. Where you once defended quickly, you now listen and respond. Where you once performed, you now attend. Choices about speech, shorter sentences, fewer promises, more reparative gestures, signal the interior shift. Language change reshapes expectations in others. Relationship recalibration is inevitable. Some connections will deepen, others will fade. This is not a moral failing, but a natural sorting. The people who can meet you at your new level will show up differently. Those who cannot will either adjust or drop away. Honor these transitions without dramatizing them. Use grief rituals when needed: a letter unsent, a small farewell, a practice of gratitude for what was shared. Sustain the practices that created the gold: routine maintenance, meditation, physical care, accountability, prevents regression. Gold that sits unpolished dulls, so keep the rituals that maintain your shine. Periodic retreats and small sabbaticals recalibrate and prevent the life of integration from being subsumed by business. Finally, remember service as the final test. Emergence is not merely personal benefit. The gold becomes meaningful when used to sustain others. Mentor, create institutions, teach practices that replicate the pathway. The authenticity of your transformation is proven when it becomes generative. Emergence is quiet authority. Integrate your refinement into daily structures. Speak less but with more weight, and let your life be a steady service to others. To be refined into gold carries both radiance and responsibility. The person who becomes luminous is now seen differently. Their actions are weighted. Presence becomes a currency that changes rooms, decisions, and patterns. This is the gift and ability to stabilize chaos, to inflect conversations with clarity, to model a way of living that is not frantic but consequential. Others find it magnetic because the steady person promises a refuge of reliability. In organizations, this person is the quiet center; in families, a stabilizing anchor. Yet gold carries burdens. Expect projection. People will load hopes and requests that exceed your capacity. Expect misunderstanding. Those who prosper from the old arrangements may feel threatened. Expect loneliness. Intimacy requires others to be willing to meet you, and many will not have done the inner work to match your depth. Anticipating these burdens is not pessimism, it is sober realism. Preparing structurally, by defining boundaries, creating support systems, and delegating wisely, manages the burden. Ethical obligation deepens. Refinement without generosity calcifies into elitism. The person shaped by fire must ask, how will I use this authority? Will I hoard dignity or invest it? Use your steadiness to create conditions where others can practice. Train apprentices. Redesign workplaces to protect deep work. Fund small retreats. The ethical question is non-negotiable. Maturation implies the duty to expand the space for others. There is also the danger of complacency. Gold is shiny and shines seductively. Avoid mistaking luminosity for completion. The path remains iterative. New tests will come, different in form but similar in requirement. Continue to accept apprenticeships, to take corrective feedback, and to live as a student of life. Complacency is the enemy of durability. Finally, the resonance of one life is exponential. A well-lived life influences networks, which influence culture. The small acts, consistently kept promises, patient listening, courageous decisions, multiply. People who experience you will model your presence in their relationships and institutions. This is the profound multiplier. One refined person changes not only themselves, but the habitat they walk through. Conclude with gratitude. The fire that almost consumed you is also the means of being entrusted with repair. Honor it by continued fidelity to practice, by generosity, and by humility. Your passage through fire is a gift. Become gold not for show, but to steady the world that still needs refinement.